What is up, Mets fans? Welcome back to another Mets postgame show with myself and Rob right here on both of our YouTube channels. We are breaking down the action that we saw this afternoon between our New York Mets and the St. Louis Cardinals. It's March 12th, 2025, and we are fastly approaching opening day. With that, Rob, how you doing, man?
Good, good. Nice little afternoon baseball here. It wasn't a very fun game to watch, score wise, but it ended quickly, a lot quickly than we thought. But we're here and ready to talk some Mets.
Yeah, absolutely. I was prepared to come on this stream in another hour at 4:15, and the game was just absolutely going by very quickly, like you just said. So we're here a little bit early, but again, we understand if you're at work or all the other obligations that you have, please do make sure to smash the thumbs up button, subscribe to both channels as we are bringing you pregame and postgame content and coverage on both of our channels, whether it's together or individually at some point, almost every day, you're going to hear from one of us on this screen throughout this entire season. So, with that, let's get into it because, again, Rob, like you just said, it wasn't really an eventful game, to be honest with you. I mean, the Mets do end up beating the Cardinals 2-0. A little bit of a pitching battle. Miles Michaelis was going on their side. Paul Blackburn, who we'll talk about here in just a second. I want to talk about him after we get into the offense because he absolutely needed this type of start that he produced today. But you see up and down the board here, Francisco Lindor, not just an RBI for the New York Mets. He's had a little bit of an up and down spring training so far. He goes 1 for 3 with the first RBI of the game. Juan Soto takes the over. Pete Alonso gets another base hit. His bat has been rolling in spring training. And Jesse Winker goes 1 for 2 with a walk, and Mark Vientos 0 for 3 with a strikeout. Now, this top four to top five is what I want to talk about because, as we'll talk about in the last slide of this post game, in terms of a little bit of a premature roster outlook come opening day and the 26 guys that we could be talking about, that's where the majority of this post game is going to be concentrated around. But, you know, Jesse Winker playing left field. I know that Brandon Nimmo has resumed baseball activities, but again, recently getting that injection in his knee that we talked about a couple of streams ago. How are we feeling with the offensive production from today?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't pretty, but I like to see Winker in there. Again, it's going to be matchups when it comes to the cleanup hitter at this point. It looks like the 1, 2, and 3 spot in the lineup is going to be that for now. And the 4 and 5, depending if it's Vientos, Nimmo, Winker, Marte for that matter, I guess 4 through 6 is going to be a mixture of lefty, righty, lefty, depending on the matchup. Uh, I like it. Like I'm very impressed with the offense, the way it's looking. They, the few times they actually had a lineup that looks like an opening day lineup, they put up a ton of runs. Not today, obviously, but it was still really nice to see Lindor get an RBI. That was nice. Pete Alonso's been rolling in spring training. Jesse Winker has been pretty good. Again, Mark Vientos had a rough game, but not the end of the world. But Chris, I know you were talking about, you did a video the other day about Marte in regards to trading him. I don't want to trade him anymore. This guy can be out for 3 months, come to the plate with basically no practice and get a big hit. I just feel like me and you don't like the platoon at DH, right? We don't like it at all. I don't think it's successful enough to go with that. But for some reason, Marte and Winker seem like the perfect platoon. I don't know why. I have no idea why, and that doesn't mean that Nimmo's going to be, playing left field. But if the platoon's going to be Winker and DH, I'm sorry, Marte. I don't know why, but I feel like it's going to work. I think it's going to help Marte to stay healthy, and I think it's going to help Winker playing against more righties. And I think it's going to be the best of both worlds, even though we both don't like the platoon.
So I have a question for you, and this is what I want to bring up. We're going to revisit this at the end of this stream when we take a look at the overarching 26-man projection given the injuries that we have. But I have a question for you. So we're talking about Jesse Winker, we're talking about Starling Marte, and now we're talking about Brandon Nimmo in this revolving trio of DH and left field. Let's be honest, because left field is up in question of who's going to be there come opening day. I mean, Houston has Framber Valdez essentially, if all things go right, he's going day one for them on March 27th in Houston against the New York Mets. Do you think there's a possibility? And I agree. And even though I did that Starling Marte video, I am 100% aware that Starling Marte is
Yeah.
probably most likely 99% going to be on this team, with only the off chance that the Mets find a suitor before opening day. But I think he's going to be a New York Met regardless. I think that it's more likely to see him being traded at the deadline, if anything. But do you think that there's a world where Starling Marte is the opening day left fielder if Brandon Nimmo is not going to the IL, but they also don't want him in left field? Because if they're going to be playing matchups, you and I both don't like matchups. I think that we can both agree on that. I know managers tend to like matchups. I could care less about lefty righty matchups. I know sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I don't want to get into the whole science of that, but if they're going to play matchups and Framber Valdez is on the mound and Brandon Nimmo is not going to the IL, if he's going to be part of the 26-man roster, you're going to be batting Brandon Nimmo somewhere in the top 5. So in that case, you'll have to decide whether you want to go with the extra lefty and Jesse Winker against Framber Valdez, lefty, or you're going to put Marte there. And I think that we can both agree that we're not expecting to see Starling Marte in the field a whole lot often, right? This year at all. But it begs the question. It's kind of a curious thought in my mind. So I just don't know which route Mendoza is going to take.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how Nimmo feels, because you got to remember, Houston got the Crawford boxes. It's not a big left field, so there's not much moving around, not much running around for Nimmo to, I'm not going to say can't hurt himself, but he could, but it's not a big left field, right? Obviously, the left center field can be a little quirky, but still, it's understandable that with the Crawford boxes, it's not a big left field. I wouldn't be surprised if Nimmo plays left field on opening day, but I still wouldn't be shocked if he's a guy that comes off the bench late in the game against a righty. I would play Tyrone Taylor, to be quite honest with you. They might go Marte in left. I'm sorry, they might go Winker in left field, and I'm sorry, Jesus, might go Tyrone Taylor in left field, and probably Marte at DH. I think that's the route they'll go if they don't feel Nimmo's healthy enough to play the field. And again, Nimmo can come in the 5th inning, in the 4th inning, because you saw Mendoza do that a lot last year when they went to a lineup for a lefty, and then by the 5th inning, the lefty was out, and then they put the righties in the lefties in the game when a righty came in. So I'm not gonna go crazy, but I do feel like they're going to go with matchups, to be quite honest with you. I don't think they're going to try to, think outside the box, so to speak. They're just going to go with matchups. And on opening day, I guess you can do matchups because nobody's really hot, except if you look at the spring training numbers. So I'm not going to go crazy. If it's like game like 57, I don't like playing with matchups because you want to go with the hot hands. On opening day, I don't mind matchups. Even in the first series, I don't mind matchups. But it seems like that's the way they go. They use the analytics in a way that probably we don't like. But I think you're going to see Marte DH right away. I think Wicker's probably not going to play on opening day. I'd be shocked because, Wicker's not very good against lefties. But again, you gave him $10 million. I know that might not mean a lot to a lot of people, but that means something to David Stearns. That means something to, the organization. So if Winker might get the first opportunity against a lefty, and you know what, we might need him more often than not, because again, if we're not going to go matchups and go with the hot hand, if Winker's red hot, you're going to sit him against a lefty when he's like 10 for 12, 2 home runs, couple of RBIs. No, you probably will based on matchups. I like playing a hot hand.
So if Brandon Nimmo is on the roster, they deem him healthy enough not to put him on the IL. From what you just said and what I'm gathering is that Brandon Nimmo is either playing left field or he's not playing at all come opening day.
Yeah, I think he has to feel good to play left field. And again, like I said, it's the first game of the year. They're not going to stretch Valdez out 6, 7, 8 innings. They're probably going to take him out early. I wouldn't be shocked if they bring in a right-hander. Nimmo will take the place of whoever's DHing that day. If it's Marte or another righty that might be DHing, even if it's Tyrone Taylor and Winker in left. and something like that. I think Brendan Nimmo will come in probably mid game once the lefty comes
Yeah,
out.
I don't know, man. I think that again, just because I don't believe in the matchups that much, I think that you need Brandon Nimmo in there no matter what, whether it's
I
a
agree.
lefty or whether it's a righty. I'm inclined to believe that if he's not ready to go in left field, but they deem him healthy enough to be on the roster, he's going to be DHing. And at that point, it's going to be a toss up between the trio of Winker, Tyrone Taylor and Starling Marte in left field, to which I think that Tyrone Taylor's probably going to win that job. And you're going to see Winker and Marte both on the bench. And this is why it's such an interesting combination because coming into the season, all spring training, all off season, especially after Winker got re-signed and we knew that Marte was probably going to be on this roster, we're talking about this team like, all right, Brandon Nimmo's our left fielder, and we're going to have this platoon at DH between Winker and Marte. Now with this, Nimmo injury, he could be healthy and ready for opening day in left field, but on the off chance he's not, Mendoza's going to have a really big decision to make if the Mets front office, has him on the roster and they choose not to IL him. I honestly think if he's not ready to play the field, you might as well just put him on the IL and you just don't have any questions surrounding that because things get really, really difficult at that point. But I think that if he's on the roster, if he's not IL'd, Brandon Nimmo is going to be your DH. There's just simply no way you keep his bat out of the lineup,
I agree.
regardless of what the matchup is. And that's just how I'm going to say that. And I think Tyrone Taylor at that point would benefit playing left field and being that defensive quote unquote substitute, although we saw his bat being very competent last year down the stretch as well. So we'll see how that goes. But in any case, Starling Marte, who recently got back into game action here in spring training, goes 1-for-3 with 2 strikeouts. Luis Torrens, who's going to be the Mets' everyday catcher for at least the first month and a half of the season, takes the 0-for, although his bat has been pretty impressive in spring training so far. As we just mentioned, Tyrone Taylor, he gets to start today in center field. He's going to be platooning, we would think, in center field with Jose Siri, depending on the Brandon Nimmo injury. He goes 1-for-3 with a run scored, and he did score the first run of the ball game off of Francisco Lindor's RBI. And Luis Angel Acuna, who takes the 0-for-3 today, has really not impressed with his bat this spring training. I think he came into this game 3 for his first 19. That would put him at 3 for 22, just about. I mean, we know the defensive capabilities and the versatility that he possesses, but just quite simply, his bat has not lived up to expectations here so far early in spring training. Anything else on the offense from you, Rob? As again, we didn't really get much offense today. I think William Lugo had the only other run scored with a solo home run for the New York Mets to make it 2-0 at that point.
Yeah, with Luis Torrens, you know where you're going to get defensively. You know you're going to get the arm behind the plate. He has a little pop in his bat, so I have no problem with Luis Torrens. I don't think we're going to miss much from Francisco Alvarez, to be quite honest with you, because I think Francisco Alvarez is an enigma. We have no idea what he's going to be. He was such a high top prospect, and he hasn't shown it as of yet. We're not missing much of Luis Torrens, especially at the bottom of the order. And Luis Angel Acuna, I'm very disappointed in Luis Angel Acuna. I think he had a very good opportunity to win this job if he showed a little bit more. I truly believe that. I think if he showed a little bit more, maybe they would have had more of a reason to not, leave Marte on this roster or, somebody getting off this route. Let's say I think Luis Angel Acuna, even though I think that Bay always had the edge, I think the Mets want to see Luis Angel Acuna because I think he falls into this category of certain players where I think he gets bored. I think he gets lazy. And I don't know if you noticed that, but if you look at during the games he played, it doesn't look like he's like into the game. And I know that's crazy to seem. I feel like he's just a little lazy. And not saying he's not going to be a good player or anything like that. I think the Mets wanted to see more because I think they had it in their mind that even the manager said he's going to be a big part of this team. Like it just seems like it's not even a thought that Acuna is going to make this team. And maybe he knows that. And maybe he's just like, the hell with it. I'm just going to, do what I got to do and stay healthy and then get to the minors and, show off there. But I'm a little disappointed in Luis Angel Acuna right now.
Yeah, that I mean, I'm not sure if I agree with the lazy aspect of that. I don't think that he's lazy at all. I think what I've seen from him, it's a tale of two tapes in terms of like his defensive capabilities versus the
Yeah,
offensive capability translating. But there is something to say, you're right, in terms of him not performing up to expectations and up to standards, given that he had such a great opportunity coming into spring training and this camp to win a job. And it is a little bit disappointing to see his bat falter. Um, but I'm curious too, like you just said in the last point of your statement, you know, have the Mets told him, hey, listen, I mean, you're not going to be making the roster. I don't think that they would have told him that, but like there's speculation. Sometimes they tell players things like, hey, listen, you're going to be starting your season off in AAA. And I guess demeanors can change at that point, but I still think that Luis Angel Acuna is going to come up and make a regular impact at
yeah,
some point in 2025. I don't think that Carlos Mendoza was just saying that just for fluff. David Stern's the same thing. I think that he's going to come up in a major way. I just don't see it at this point. If he had a stronger start to spring training, I could see him potentially making the roster. And I was talking about him as such pretty much since these games began. But now I'm like, all right, yeah, the writing's probably on the wall, especially with how strong of a spring training that Brett Beatty's shown that he's had, that he's probably going to be starting his season off in AAA. So
yeah.
that's a good point with Luis Angel Acuna on your part in terms of the actual aspect of maybe they have already let him know behind closed doors that he's going to be in the minor leagues to start the season.
And there's no need to rush him. There really isn't. Like, it's not like there's a gaping hole at second base, right? We talked about Brett Beatty having a great spring, right? They really seemed impressed with what he's done at second base. So I think that's a good sign. There's no need to rush Acuna. Why put tremendous pressure on him? I know he had a tremendous amount of pressure last year, late in the season, in the playoffs, and the defensive capabilities he had when Lindor was hurt. But there's no need to rush him. Let him get better. There's no need. I'd rather have him a better player in May than lesser of a player in April, and he might hurt the team. There's no need, right? You got Jeff McNeil. I know people, are going nuts about Jeff McNeil, but you could have a lot worse, okay? You really could have a lot worse. And you also have Brett Beatty as well. So it's not the end of the world with second base, in my opinion. And to rush Acuna for what? Just so you could say you have Luis Acuna on the roster, it's just kind of silly to me. I think Brett Beatty and McNeil would do a decent job, not a great job, a decent job when they have their opportunities. And if we're going to be talking about Jeff McNeil as a problem in this lineup, then the top of the order is not doing the job. The similar thing with last year, how we were killing the bottom of the order when they weren't doing well. It was because the top of the order wasn't doing well. If 1 through 5 or 1 through 6 is doing their job, nobody's going to give a damn about Jeff McNeil. They really won't. So that's the way I see it.
Yeah, and I think that as soon as the Mets started giving Brett Beatty reps at second base, that was kind of like the writing on the wall that like, hey, we're going to be trying everything in our power to get Brett Beatty, and give him a chance to win this job one last time before we go down the other route. Well, whether that's the veteran, and a guy like Donovan Walton, there's a real case to be made for him too, in terms of being like a Joey Wendell or Zach Short 2.0, or whether it's Luis Angel Acuna. And no name is bringing up, who's the backup for Terens. We will talk about that here in just a second. But as we wrap up this portion of the offensive side of things in this 2-0 win against the St. Louis Cardinals, we do have to talk about the pitching, because as people mentioned up at the top of the chat, especially Ethan, there's a lot of good things to take away from the pitching side of things. Paul Blackburn, he needed to show me something today in a major way, because his first couple of outings, I believe he appeared in 3 games besides this one, it was not good. He has looked lost and the results have not followed, but he follows up in a major way today against the St. Louis Cardinals. 4 innings pitched, 2 strikeouts, no earned runs, much needed. Although, when we look at the next slide, and I promise you, let me just give you a sneak peek here, just because I think people are like very curious about like this discussion we're going to have about backup catcher, bullpen, etc. I have this in front of us. So we're going to be talking about the 26 guys on this roster right here. You see that names highlighted in red as sticking points too. So let's not rush ahead too much, but Paul Blackburn has his work cut out for him in terms of trying to crack this opening day rotation, but his safety blanket could be the bullpen because at this point of his career, clearly he has no options left available on his contract. And the Mets, I would imagine, don't want to lose out on him for nothing. And so they're going to try everything in their power to make him a staple on this team, just like they tried to make Adrian Hauser a staple last season before he got the DFA. But it's good to see at the very minimum, even though there was a lot of hard contact and some outs that he produced today, there was about 4 or 5 batted balls that were over 100 miles per hour exit velocity off of Paul Blackburn. It's good to see no earned runs and the clean 4 innings that he produced for the Mets as he is vying for this fifth rotation spot come opening day.
Yeah, I mean, this is Paul Blackburn. Like, he's going to have terrible starts. He's going to have decent starts like today. He's not a strikeout guy. He's a contact pitcher. He pitches to contact, and you're going to have it. This is what you're going to get from a fourth or fifth starter. This is, I know a lot of people are, bitching and moaning about when it was Montas, when it was Blackburn, when it was this guy or that guy that's fourth or fifth. You're not getting anything better than a 4.5 ERA from probably a fourth starter. And the reason why we keep on talking about the lineup is because of the fact that if you can hold teams, if you have a 4.5 ERA, you should still have a chance of winning ball games if you give up 4 runs per ball game with a lineup that we have. I'm okay with Blackburn. I think he's going to make the roster. It's Stern's guy. He brought him in here. He's a veteran. I think you need another veteran. I think the fifth starter should be, whoever wins the job. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But what about the Mets pitchers, starting pitchers that are fighting for jobs? Everybody, even Tyler McGill was 98, 99 on a gun yesterday and pitched well. But Blackburn, he's going to be in this rotation. I find it very hard to believe unless he, has an Adrian Hauser type of April. I think that's the only way he ends up off this out of this rotation, not off the team, but off this out of the starting rotation, and then you might see the Cranachs of the world and the McGills. I still think McGill's going to be the one going into the bullpen, to be quite honest with you.
Oh, you think that? Okay. All right. All right. We're going to talk about that here. So hold on to that thought because we're going to talk about that here. This is going to be a major sticking point to this post-game stream that I really want to delve into because the way that this back end of the rotation and the back end of the bullpen with the last spot or two is going to shake out, it's going to be extremely interesting. But really, really, really good news for the New York Mets as AJ Minter makes his spring training debut. I mean, this is the guy that I wanted all along this offseason, Rob. I know that you can attest to that. I was screaming, AJ Minter, AJ Minter, AJ Minter. They finally bring him in, right? After the Mets had lost Brooks Raley last season, unfortunately, in April. He was off to a red hot start, by the way, and then really just messed up his arm and his whole season was done after that. But AJ Minter makes his spring training debut. He had a hip injury that he dealt with as an Atlanta Brave that pretty much ended the second half of his season last season. He goes out there. He's sitting 93 miles per hour with his fastball, an inning pitched with 1 strikeout. He looked good. He looked sharp. And this is a really good indication for him trending towards the right direction and being ready come opening day, which was really, I guess, a up in the air type question in terms of if he was actually going to be ready or not. But this is a really good step in the right direction. I liked what I saw from AJ Minter today.
Yeah, I'm shocked that we seen him this early. I know it's March 12th, but I thought we were going to see him probably a week before opening day, and it was going to be a question mark. But seeing him this early means he's feeling good. The Mets wouldn't put him out there if he wasn't feeling good. And yeah, he was hitting 93. I think he hit 94 once, but yeah, he's going to get it up to 95, 96, probably even 97. Probably a little, couple of starts from now, you'll see him ramp it up. There's only, he's warming up his arm. He's stretching out his arm a little bit. So look, we know he's a good pitcher, right? If that hip surgery worked, he's going to be pain free, right? We keep on talking about the same thing with David Peterson. It's a similar surgery that he had, and when the pain is gone, you can repeat your mechanics. You can be your old self that you thought you could be, and thought we know Minter can be. And I think looking back at what he did with the Braves while he struggled and while he was hurt isn't a good indication. It's what you saw when he was excellent with the Braves. And I think that's what we're going to get. You know, he's a really good pitcher. He knows how to pitch. He doesn't just try to blow guys past him. He uses other secondary pitches and tertiary pitches that I think that is going to make him extremely important and extremely good as a setup man to Edwin Diaz. I'd love to see him this early. That means that he's feeling good. The Mets feel good about him, and to get him on this opening day roster is, I think, is a big deal.
And not even just a setup, man. I mean, if there's a world where Edwin Diaz needs a day off, right?
Yep. Yep.
And Mendoza can align his bullpen in a certain manner that he wants to. I mean, Minter has closing experience in that Braves organization, vast closing experience, and so does Ryan Stanek. And that's where I like this bullpen a lot for the New York Mets, is that they have a multitude of guys that can appear in multiple types of looks, late in the ball game. I mean, even Reed Garrett, although he wasn't really successful as a closer in Edwin Diaz's absence last season, at least he has that experience under his belt in an emergency situation. So that's the one, underrated aspect of AJ Minter, is that, yes, by and large, he's going to be the setup man to Edwin Diaz, and that's what he was brought in here to do, right? Be that lockdown eighth inning guy. But in the event that Edwin Diaz needs the day off, okay, Daniel Nunez, you get the eighth, or Ryan Stanek, you get the eighth, depending on how you want to look at that. And then AJ Minter, you get the ninth, go win us a ball game. So I like that a lot. Danny Young, another guy that is, fringe. He's on the fringe of the cusp, I should say, of making this roster. I think he will, and I'll get into why he will in just a second. But he tosses a scoreless inning today as well, 2 strikeouts. It really depends on if the Mets really want to utilize a dual lefty bullpen, or they would rather just keep AJ Minter as that lone lefty. And depending on what happens with the rotation as well, should they need to fit one of those rotation guys into the back end of the bullpen, alongside maybe a guy like Griffin Canning, etc. But also your guy, Tyler Zuber, who's going to be definitely AAA depth, but has shown a very good capability so far this spring training. And this is where I like the depth in terms of the minor league farm system that the Mets are going to have, to start the season off. You talk about Huascar Brazaban's going to be there, Tyler Zuber, Genesis Cabrera, who's a non-roster invitee to spring training, has his ups and downs, but has good stuff. He's going to be there in AAA to start the season. There's a good outlook in terms of what the Mets have to be excited for should there be an emergency situation where they need one of these guys. So that's how the rest of the ball game shook out. And no pun intended, but TJ Shook, I think he did actually complete the inning to end the ball game today. He got into some trouble, so that should read 1 inning pitched with, I guess, a hit and 2 walks allowed. He loaded the bases, but he was able to get out of the jam and close out the ball game for the 2-0 win. Anything here on the pitching side of things from today before we get into the meat and bones of this stream in terms of the 26-man roster, Rob?
Yeah, I love the depth. Like from starting rotation for the sixth, seventh, and eighth guy, even with the Montaz and the Manaya injury, it just, it's exciting to know that you can plug and play with these guys in the bullpen or the rotation. Not saying they're going to be better than those guys, but they can definitely play their part and do a decent job, and keep that spot afloat and keep it at least above average, or at least average at best. Because I just love the fact that the depth here, and especially with the bullpen, like are not worried about the bullpen, because we know how many depth pieces there are that can easily fill in. Not saying they're going to be better than the guys they might replace, but they'll be almost as good. And I think that's the key here, where you might not have the greatest rotation, but you got a tremendous amount of depth in your bullpen and in the rotation, where I think it's not going to lack too much, where we're going to be constantly losing games because of it.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And nothing illustrates that more than this graphic right here. And I'm sure I'm missing a couple of names in the depth category as well. But, when we take a look at the lineup rotation and bullpen and who could be rounding out the 26-man roster come opening day, it's anybody's guess, especially after the injuries to Alvarez, Montas, and Manaya. So this is your tentative outlook of a 26-man roster, according to me. I'm sure that Rob has his own opinions, especially on some of these fringe roster spots, and I want to give you the chance to sort of talk about that. But, as it pertains to the lineup, you see Brandon Nimmo's name highlighted in red. I mean, it's anybody's guess if he's going to be the left fielder, let alone on the roster or on the IL come opening day. Luis Torrens there with the asterisk down in that 7 spot is going to be your opening day catcher. And then you have the roster spots down below. I really do think Brett Beatty is going to win that third roster spot as a, I guess, utility man of sorts, but definitely as sort of a backup third baseman / second baseman. And it's really a plus side for him to be getting those second base reps. And I think that's what helped him out in terms of making my decision so far, along with his hot start in the bat or with the bat. But also, I'm not sure if you saw Carlos Mendoza was just like, he was being asked, how do you view needing a backup shortstop on the roster come opening day? And he was kind of like shaking it off in a sense, because that was really the sticking point of how I saw Luis Angel Acuna potentially winning an opening day roster spot, because he does have that shortstop experience that Brett Beatty really doesn't in terms of in-game action. But again, I mean, if you're going to need a backup shortstop, it means Francisco Lindor is probably going to be on the shelf, which you don't want to have happen, and nobody's expecting for that to happen. And if that were to happen, right, then Syracuse is only a short call away in terms of bringing Luis Angel Acuna back up. But the question that we had earlier in the chat is who's going to be the backup catcher now to Luis Torrens? Now, I am not ruling out an external move for a backup catcher, right, that has a little bit more MLB experience. But at this point, we saw him get the start in the last Tyler McGill outing against the Houston Astros. I believe it was yesterday, the day before that. Hayden Sanger, he's a defensive-minded catcher. He threw a runner out in Tyler McGill's outing. And I think that that's probably what the Mets are looking for. They're not really looking for much offense, with the backup catcher. And this goes back to the whole point of, like, remember when we were watching Tomas Nido, right? I mean, we had him in there because he knew how to play defense. He couldn't hit anything pretty much. There's an off chance that he would get, on base or a base hit for you, whatever. But that's kind of how I view Hayden Sanger. And it's nothing more, nothing less with him. And I think that at this point, he should be the front runner, although Jackson Reitz is kind of making a little bit of a case on why he should be the opening day backup catcher as well. So I'm curious to see how you view that. But I think that's a moot point at this point, right? I mean, it's going to be Luis Torrens doing the bulk catching duties until Francisco Alvarez gets back. And we're only talking about 6 to 8 weeks. And I understand that Francisco Alvarez is probably going to come back. He's probably going to be not in game form, right? At that point, it's going to take him a little bit longer than that 6 to 8 week time frame. But really, the catching position is a position that I'm used to. You're used to. This entire Mets fan base is used to being lackluster over the past couple of seasons. So what's another maybe month or two of being lackluster before your starting catcher comes back? So what do you think about this graphic?
God, I miss the days of Paul Duca, Mike Piazza. God. Yeah, well, look, we know Luis Torrens can't play 7 days a week, right? So you're going to need a backup catcher. I'd rather have the backup catcher while your starter is down as a defensive guy that can call a good game and throw out runners. That's I'm not worried about the bat. If you got to bat the guy 8, who cares? Like I think that's not much of an issue. I want the guy that comes in, top right, good call. Yeah, I mean it is. I'd rather see Reitz. I don't know why. I think he provides a little bit more offense, but again, I'm not going to bang my fist on the table if Sanger's the one that's going to be the backup catcher. I'd like to see one of these two guys get the backup job, though, because I was hearing rumors, about a couple of veteran catchers. The James McCann name came back up today or yesterday. Come on, like, could we just see one of the kids? Like, let's just see what they got, right? This is their time to shine a little bit. And if they played once or twice a week, let him do it. Come on. Like, I don't want to hear Stearns talk about kids and want to see the kids play, and then he can bring in James McCann. Like, I mean, come on. Like, let him. It's not putting a has been at shortstop because Lindor's out, right? It's not like that at all. Just put Sanger, put Reitz. Let's see what the kids got. They're not going to play every day. We hope not. And they get a couple of games a week. And if they're a problem, you switch them. You give somebody else an opportunity. And that's in the farm system. So why not? I like Reitz though because I think he has a little bit more bat, um, um a lot more bat than than Sanger. But I like to see one of those two guys make it. It just makes sense at that point. You want me to talk about something else, or you good with that?
Listen, we're gonna get into the rotation and the bullpen before we get out of here, and it took everything within me not to put Max Kranick's name in the rotation or the bullpen column. I really want to. I really, really want to. But the fact that he has an option remaining on his contract tells me something tells me that David Stearns and this Mets front office is going to have him starting off in AAA, and they're going to give as many chances as possible early on in the season to Paul Blackburn, Griffin Canning, and Danny Young. Danny Young also doesn't have any options remaining. And Griffin Canning is on a major league deal worth $4.25 million. So Blackburn, like you said, is going to be a part of this roster, no matter if it's in the rotation or the bullpen. Same thing with Griffin Canning. And I guess if Daniel Nunez is on the roster or not, that's kind of the wild card in terms of Danny Young. With how crowded everything is, and I agree with you. Tyler McGill is definitely going to be in this rotation, I think, as the fourth starter. And for better, for worse, we'll see eventually. But I think that the way that this front office has worked and is going to work, given the names that we have here, performance alone, Max Kranick should be on this roster by and large. It doesn't really matter, right? And if there was a world where it meant letting Paul Blackburn go and having Max Kranick just start the season off, I would do it. But I'm not convinced this front office is going to do it, to be honest with you, because there is still some form of value with these veteran guys, which is what Canning is, which is what Paul Blackburn is. And if you're talking about Danny Young and having that experience down the stretch of a meaningful season in 2024, then you can also lump Danny Young into that category as well. So I think that Max Kranick is still going to be the odd man out, even though he's posted 8 scoreless innings with 10 strikeouts so far this spring training, and he's looked absolutely dominant. What do you think about this? Because it just pains me to have to sit here and just watch Max Kranick dominate the competition early in spring training and tell everybody that Paul Blackburn and Griffin Canning are still going to make the roster above him. But I think that's exactly how it's going to play out, unfortunately.
This is why I have a problem with David Stearns and that I don't believe everything he says. Because if winning is the main thing and giving the kids a chance is what he preaches almost every time he speaks to the media, he's doing the exact opposite. And I 100% agree with you. I think this is going to be the rotation going into the opening day, and it's stupid, to be quite honest with you. Right? I think Griffin Cannon, he gave $4.5 million to. He's going to be on this team somehow, some way. Bullpen, rotation, doesn't matter. If Max Kranick doesn't make the opening day roster, then don't believe another word out of David Stern's mouth because it just doesn't make sense. You talk about young guys having the flexibility. Max Kranick has flexibility. McGill still has options, so you can bring him down to the minors if you need to. And I get Paul Blackburn. I understand why Paul Blackburn would be in this rotation. But to have Max Kranick not in this rotation when he's been basically your best starter that is not officially in the rotation, with Clay Holmes, Peterson, those guys looked good. Senga looked good in his outing. Kranick's been the best. Like, it shouldn't be a decision. It shouldn't be a hard decision. And it seems like this is what I got mad at with David Stearns last year. They tried to be too cute. And I feel like you're going to be too cute here. And it doesn't make sense. I think you're going to be too cute in the bullpen with Young and with Cannon, to be quite honest with you. Like, I think it's being too cute. There's other guys that deserve it other than those two guys. And that's what I don't understand. And that's why it's frustrating that there's more than, if that's the case, go to a 6-man rotation like you were going to do anyway and put Kranick in a rotation. You know what I'm saying? Like the 6-man rotation was like it was like the 10 commandments when they were talking during the winter meetings and during the off season. That's all they talked about was a 6-man rotation. If you want to give the opportunity to the best pitcher that was fighting for a spot, just put the 6-man rotation, 6 guy in the rotation, and put Kranick in there if you're going to throw McGill in there, who's had an okay spring. Blackburn finally had a good start. That's why I can't believe any words out of their mouth, because they have enough guys that pitch well enough to go to a 6-man rotation that they live and died on in this offseason. Just make a 6-man rotation. If you don't do that, then how can I believe anything they say out of your mouth?
Yeah, I have no idea what they're gonna do in terms of the 5-man or the 6-man, come opening day. I've seen a couple of roster projections out there from some Mets beat reporters. They're projecting a 5-man rotation to start off the season with an 8-man bullpen, and then probably transitioning back into a 6-man rotation come May, like we talked about the off days, etc. It's anyone's guess at this point. It doesn't really matter, to be honest with you, because you have at least, I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4 fringe guys that can be either bullpen pieces or back end of the rotation pieces in McGill, Blackburn, Canning, and Kranick. And again, Danny Young is a conversation that's separate because it's either you want the second lefty or you don't, because Genesis Cabrera, who's a non-roster invitee, I mean, he's going to be starting off his season in AAA regardless. So it it's tough for me, man. It's really tough because McGill, I think, is the surest of them all to be
Yeah.
in this rotation because we've been there, we've done that before with Tyler McGill. And even though I don't agree with it because I'm not really a fan of Tyler McGill's game. I think that he shows flashes of brilliance, and we've seen those flashes of brilliance before. But then the very next outing, he goes back to what he really is, a could be dominant pitcher that's just not efficient. And it really doesn't really do much good for the New York Mets in the grand scheme of things. But I think inevitably, with the injuries that are present with Minaya and Montas, we're going to see Tyler McGill in that 4 spot. The 5 spot is really what irks me because Paul Blackburn has not been pitching his way by and large into this rotation. And the Mets are just going to rely on his veteran status, you know, being that also, I'm not saying this is, a factor into it, but David Stearns at the end of the day did go out and get him himself last trade deadline. And so I'm not sure if that helps him or not, but I think it would be a very big injustice to stating that best man wins out of spring training while also simultaneously leaving Max Kranick off the roster. I think that that would be a backward sort of look and philosophy if that happens. So I'm holding out a little bit of hope that the Mets do the right thing and keep Max Kranick come opening day. But as I just stated, I just don't see it happening. I think that how
Yeah.
we're going to see this play out is Blackburn and Canning are going to be on the roster. You could probably even switch them. You could have Canning in the rotation and Blackburn in the bullpen. It doesn't really matter because I think that it's sort of a flip and switch scenario there. But once one of those guys stops performing, like Adrian Hauser did, it's going to be DFA time, and then you're going to rely on your depth. And it
Yep.
depends on the timeline of when Minaya and Montas come back at that point on how the rest of the roster shakes out. And by the way, Daniel Nunez, we haven't even talked about him. He's also highlighted in red. He is, tossing live, batting practice sessions on the field, but we haven't seen him so far in spring training action. Hopefully that changes. And it's a good thing that we've seen AJ Minter already in game action today in his debut. Hopefully we can see Daniel Nunez come into game action before the season actually starts because, is he going to start his season off in AAA and ramp up and then come back to the major leagues? Or is he going to start off in the major leagues outright? Because if he's healthy, he's a major leaguer. There's no question about it. But if he's not, and if the Mets think that he needs more time, then you're working with effectively another roster spot to give out. And that's where Max Kranick is definitely going to take that roster spot. So it's a little bit of a give and take situation here. But, Rob, 45 minutes almost into the stream. Do you have anything else on the screen that you would like to talk about as it pertains to any guys on the roster that's projected out by me or not here?
Yeah, the thing with the Danny Young situation, I'd like two lefties in the bullpen. I've said that for a while. I'm not sure if David Stern sees it that way. I know you're not big on two lefties in the bullpen. You don't mind if there's only one, but it's not the end of the world. But if you're gonna throw Danny Young in there, Genesis Cabrera has been better. He has more electric stuff. Throw him in there. Maybe because Danny Young is a lefty specialist, and with the three
Yes.
batter rule, it hurts. It hurts. I know if you have a second lefty in Minter, it's not the end of the world. But I feel like if you know with that three batter rule, it kind of doesn't help Danny Young's position in a bullpen, that you might need him to come in a game where you want to save Minter for the later innings, and say in the sixth inning you're going to need Danny Young and there's a lefty in between two righties. What do you do? Or if there's a lefty leading off and then two righties after that, you're going to have to make him pitch to him, and that's not a good sign. Genesis Cabrera, with his type of electric stuff, could get both sides out, and that's where I think things like that is why I get frustrated with David Stearns, because I understand the roster flexibility, I understand options and everything like that, but you're also trying to win. We saw what happened when you lose in April and you have to make it up in June, July, and August to just get into the playoffs. You need put the best players and the best available guys on this roster on opening day. There is no need to have somebody that's not as good as somebody you left off the roster. It just doesn't make sense. And again, we can all be completely wrong here. And he goes with Kranick and Cabrera over Young and Kranick over Tyler McGill, and who knows? And we'll be happy about that. But he doesn't seem like the guy to do that. That's the other issue. Like, he'll change it quickly if it doesn't work. He's not afraid to do that. But why wait 2 weeks in April when you lost a few games, possibly because of these guys?
Well, the only reason why I can see with not going down that route to start off with, even though it's going to grind everybody's gears, including mine, is that at that point, those are your depth pieces, right?
Yep.
So why let a guy like Danny Young go for free, right? Because he has no options. He's on the 40-man roster. He's going to go through the waivers. I doubt anybody wants him because, like you said, he is a lefty specialist at the end of the day, and that's all that he is. And his value is diminished by the three batter minimum in today's day and age. And also, Paul Blackburn, same thing. I mean, if he goes through waivers, I think a team would pick him up.
Yeah.
I don't think that he's going to be much for the New York Mets, but I think that he's going to be that 1 month to 1.5 month start of the season kind of like fill in. And at that point, like if you're starting off with Max Kranick and then you undergo another injury with anybody in this rotation, then you're royally screwed, because then you have to sort of dig into the prospects in like a Blade Tidwell or somebody else, and you have to get very creative, or you have to put Griffin Canning in the rotation, which I don't want have happening at all, and moving up a guy like Brazaban into the bullpen. So I see where you're coming from, because I'm
Yeah.
going to be frustrated if I don't see Max Kranick on this open day roster. But Max Kranick at this point, given the injuries, I feel like he is the depth, and you can't go into the depth on day one, if that
Well,
makes sense.
yeah, I totally get what you're saying. But the issue is, this is what happens when you bring in 1-year deals, split contracts, minor league invites, and you bring in guys like, these guys don't have options, or they have multiple options, guys you already have on your roster. When you bring all these guys in, you have to make decisions unnecessarily because you have too many guys. I think that's the other issue as well. It's like you're going to have to put lesser guys on this roster because you brought them in here when you didn't have to. And the guys that are better are going to get stuck in the minors because of options. And then all you're going to do in 2 weeks when they're not doing well is switch it anyway, and you're back to square one. Like that's what you can get injuries from day 1 or day 23. I just don't see, like, I understand the logic. I understand where you're coming from. Well, not you're coming from, what David Stearns is thinking here. But again, you bring in lesser guys on this roster that can ultimately hurt you losing games. While guys in the minors, because of options, it's like the same thing where they wanted to keep these guys in because they wanted to keep the service time, right? It's very similar to that. Like, that's why I don't like these 1 year deals, split contracts, minor league invites, and guys that have different type of options all over the place. And the guys that you need to keep on this roster is not good or not better than the guy that is stuck in the minors. It's just bad baseball decision. It's business decision. I understand the business side of it, but it's not the best baseball decision. And at the end of the day, what are you trying to do here? You're trying to win ball games.
Yeah, I agree with you. Listen, I mean, as it pertains to the fifth spot in the rotation, I've been very adamant that I would put Jose Buto in this rotation as the fifth guy, but it doesn't really matter at that point because even if you leave him in the bullpen, Jose Buto effectively, or maybe Griffin Canning, one of those two guys is going to be shadowing and following Paul Blackburn in
Correct.
case he has an outing where he goes 3 1/3, maybe 3 innings flat. You need that long relief, and those guys are going to be in the ball game at that point. On the flip side of things, I'd rather that start just be competitive and just put the better starting pitcher out there and Jose Buto.
Exactly.
Rob, I've been very adamant, or Max Kranick at that point,
Correct.
right? Either one of them, right?
100%. 100%.
And that's why and that's why everybody who has like listened to me say Jose Buto at this point is better suited in the rotation. A lot of people still don't understand that, but that's really the thought process that I'm going down towards is that every fifth day, I think Jose Buto gives you a better shot to win and gives you a more competitive 5 or 6 innings than Paul Blackburn does. Although Paul Blackburn could just make that transition to the bullpen on a lesser scale. And that's kind of the thought process that I have towards that. But
Yep.
again, I know a lot of people have been fighting me on that, but I'm still going to remain true to my sentiment with that.
Yeah, and look, it's the same thing. Like if this bullpen is what the roster is going to be and the rotation is going to be what it's going to be, it's Jose Buto going to be piggybacking off of Tyler McGill and Griffin Cannon piggybacking off of Paul Blackburn. That's what it's going to be. They're going to pitch multiple innings, so that means they're probably not going to pitch 2 or 3 days. And this is why, again, why I rather have the better pitcher, the guy that can be more competitive, like you said, Chris. Right? I rather see Max Kranick over Tyler McGill because I think Max Kranick can give you a more competitive game where you don't need to use Buto 2 or 3 innings because Tyler McGill can only go 3 innings. And the same thing with Paul Blackburn. I understand why he's in the rotation, but you're using Griffin Cannon 3 or 4 innings, which he's probably not going to be available for the next 3 or 4 days because and that lessens your bullpen because now Buto and Cannon are not available in back-to-back days. Well, they'll be used back-to-back days because of McGill, the fourth starter, and Blackburn, the fifth starter. But days after that, when you got Sanger, Peterson, Holmes, now you're shortening your bullpen, so to speak, with Garrett, Stanek, Minter, and Diaz, and maybe Nunez. I mean, that doesn't sound bad, but those guys have to take the bulk of those other three starts. Hopefully, those guys go a little bit deeper because if not, now you're going into your bullpen earlier and it's already shortened because of your two last guys in your rotation that you're piggybacking Buto and Cannon.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's going to be a chess game for Mendoza to figure this out with what he's given on the 26-man opening day roster. So we'll see what happens. But I just wanted to reintroduce this because I know that when we still had Alvarez, Manaya, and Montas as a part of this equation come opening day, I made this very graphic and we talked about it. And I definitely talked about it on my channel. But things have changed. I mean, injuries have changed the ball game in spring training, unfortunately, and this is what we have to deal with. And it's good to see the emergence of a guy like Max Kranick and him competing for, one of these roster spots, but we'll see what happens at the end of the day. Let us know, though, especially after we finish this stream, what you all think about how this roster is going to shake out given the injuries, whether it's the bullpen rotation or lineup. We definitely are interested in hearing your guys' thoughts. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being a part of this post game show. Really, thanks for watching. I mean, it was a 2-0 win. The offense really, again, wasn't that crisp. It wasn't that much to write home about, but they got the job done enough, and the pitching did the rest. I mean, AJ Minter, Zuber, and Paul Blackburn carrying the way for the majority of the game before TJ Shook comes in and closes things out, even in a little bit of a jam. But thanks for tuning in. Make sure to please hit those thumbs up and subscribe buttons on both of our channels. And Rob, I'll give you the final thoughts here before we close things out.
Yeah, 2 weeks away from opening day. I got my countdown for my flight to Houston on that Wednesday, the day before opening day. So I'm ready to go. Uh, Hopefully everybody stays healthy, and let's get this minor league spring training over with, and hopefully everybody remains healthy for opening day.
Yeah, absolutely 100%. I cannot wait to start talking about games that actually matter in the win-loss column, as it pertains to games that will be contributing towards a playoff run versus not. So, again, spring training, I believe this was game 17, if I'm not mistaken. I've lost count at this point, but like Rob said, 2 weeks to go until opening day. Rob's gonna be there in Houston. I wish I was there, but you know what? There's baseball to be played.
Hmm.
Games will start mattering soon, and we'll see how the open day roster shakes out. This is another edition of the Mets postgame show. We'll be here with you all 2025 long on the postgame show. Rob and myself on both channels. Like, comment, and subscribe. Hopefully you enjoyed the show. We'll see you all later. Peace.
Let's go Mets.